They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody tells you how it tastes after simmering for 68 years. The rain falls mercilessly as I stand alone at Arlington National Cemetery, abandoned by the family I've spent my life serving. My father's fresh grave before me, their cars long gone from the parking lot. The caretaker's distant voice announces closing time as darkness gathers between the monuments of dead heroes. For decades, I've been the dutiful daughter, the reliable sister, the family touchstone. I've loaned money that was never repaid, provided care that was never reciprocated, offered love that was never truly valued. I believed that's what family meant, but as I stand here soaked, forgotten, betrayed, something ignites within me, a flame of recognition, of clarity, of anger too long suppressed. My father saw it all, and in his final act of love, he left me not just his fortune, but something far more valuable, the power to demand justice. The rain fell in sheets across Washington, D.C., turning the manicured grounds of Arlington National Cemetery into a watercolor of gray and green. Eleanor Mitchell stood alone beside her father's freshly covered grave, water streaming down her black umbrella and pooling at her sensible shoes. At 68, she'd attended more funerals than weddings in recent years, but this one cut deeper than any before. Harrison Mitchell, 91 years old, former prosecutor turned corporate attorney, pillar of the Georgetown community, and her father was gone. She checked her watch, 4:32 p.m. The cemetery would be closing soon. The funeral service at National Cathedral had ended nearly 2 hours ago, followed by the military honors ceremony here at Arlington, a recognition of her father's service in the Judge Advocate General's Corps decades earlier. But where was everyone else? Eleanor scanned the nearly empty cemetery. The funeral director and his assistants had departed after the final prayer. The other mourners, her sister Taylor, brother Chris, niece Megan, and the parade of D.C. legal professionals who'd shown up to pay respects to Harrison, had all vanished. She pulled out her phone to call for a ride, only to find it dead, the battery drained from the countless photos she'd taken of the funeral arrangements that morning. Photos no one had asked for, but that she'd felt compelled to document anyway. Always the family historian, always the responsible one. The realization came slowly. Then, all at once, they had left her here. Her own family had departed from her father's funeral without her, without so much as checking if she needed a ride. "Closing in 15 minutes, ma'am," called a groundskeeper, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. Eleanor nodded, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with grief. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was the culmination of decades of being taken for granted, of being invisible except when needed. "Need some help there?" Eleanor turned to see an elderly man with an umbrella approaching from a nearby row of graves. He wore a veteran's cap and a kind expression. "I seem to have been left behind," she admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Happens more than you'd think," he said gently. "I'm headed to the metro station if you'd like a ride that far." 15 minutes later, seated on the metro's blue line, Eleanor stared at her reflection in the window. 68 years old, gray hair neatly styled, crow's feet etched beside eyes that had spent a lifetime looking after others, her late husband Robert, her father, her siblings whenever they needed money or childcare or emotional support. What did she have to show for it now? A dead phone and a rain-soaked funeral dress. Her mind drifted to the morning her father had fallen ill. Just 2 weeks ago, though it felt like years. The emergency alert had jolted Eleanor awake at 3:17 a.m. The monitoring system she'd installed in her father's bedroom was screaming that his oxygen levels had plummeted. She'd thrown on clothes, grabbed her purse, and raced to her car. The October storm that night had been vicious, turning Rock Creek Parkway into a treacherous ribbon of water and fallen branches. Driving at breakneck speed, Eleanor had hydroplaned on a curve, narrowly missing a massive oak that had fallen across the right lane. Her heart hammered as she regained control, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Hold on, Dad," she whispered, pushing the accelerator harder. By the time she'd reached the Georgetown townhouse where Harrison lived, where she'd spent the last 3 years caring for him, the ambulance was already there. The EMTs had revived him temporarily, but their expressions told her everything. "His heart is failing," one said quietly. "We need to get him to Georgetown University Hospital immediately." She'd ridden in the ambulance, holding her father's papery hand as the sirens wailed into the night. For a brief moment, his eyes had opened, startlingly lucid. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice barely audible above the equipment. "The book, remember." "Save your strength, Dad," she'd urged, but he gripped her hand with surprising force. "Promise me, the book, I promise, she'd said, not understanding but knowing it mattered. Those were the last words they'd exchanged. Harrison Mitchell had slipped into unconsciousness and died 3 days later, never having awakened again. The Metro announcement for Foggy Bottom Station snapped Eleanor back to the present. She thanked the veteran who'd helped her and stepped onto the platform, still miles from home, but at least back in familiar territory. As she emerged onto 23rd Street, her phone suddenly vibrated against her hip, somehow resurrected with just enough battery for one notification. A text from her sister. "Where are you? We need to discuss Dad's will ASAP. Call me when you get this." "No. Are you okay? No, sorry we left." Just demands, as always. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a tectonic plate of emotion, moving after decades of pressure. For the first time in her life, she didn't immediately respond to her sister's summons. Instead, she hailed a taxi and directed it toward Georgetown. "Terrible day for a funeral," the driver commented, eyeing her black dress in the rearview mirror. "You have no idea," Eleanor replied, watching the familiar landmarks of DEC slide past the rain-streaked window. The taxi pulled up outside the 3-story brownstone that had been her father's home since before she was born. Eleanor paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the elegant facade with its black shutters and gas lamps. Something felt off. The porch light was on, she hadn't left it on, and the curtain in her father's study was slightly askew. Eleanor climbed the steps slowly, key in hand. When she reached the door, she saw tiny scratch marks around the lock. Someone had picked their way in. Her first instinct was to call the police, but then she paused. What if it was Taylor or Chris? They each had keys, but they were exactly the type to forget them and break in rather than call her for help. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped inside, her senses heightened. The house smelled of furniture polish and the lingering scent of her father's pipe tobacco, a habit he'd never quite abandoned despite decades of medical warnings. She moved cautiously through the foyer, past the living room with its leather-bound books, an antique chess set, and toward Harrison's study at the back of the house. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the hallway floor. Eleanor pushed the door open wider, gasping at what she found. The study had been ransacked, books pulled from shelves, papers scattered across the desk, drawers left open and rifled through. Her father's prized first edition Hemingway lay on the floor, its spine cracked. "What on earth?" she whispered, stepping into the chaos. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps heavy and deliberate moved across the ceiling. Someone was still in the house. Eleanor grabbed the nearest weapon-like object, a heavy brass letter opener from her father's desk, and backed toward the door. But before she could retreat, the footsteps started descending the stairs, heart pounding. She ducked behind the study door, gripping the letter opener so tightly her knuckles turned white. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. "Eleanor, you home," her brother Chris's voice. Eleanor exhaled sharply, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "In the study," she called, her voice shakier than she intended. "What have you done to Dad's office?" Chris appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. At 55, he still maintained the athletic build of his college football days, though his face had grown puffy from too many business dinners and cocktail hours. His expression shifted from surprise to poorly concealed guilt when he saw the state of the room. "I was looking for something," he said dismissively. "Dad's estate documents. Figured they'd be in here." "You could have called me," Eleanor said, setting down the letter opener. "I was at his funeral, the one you all left me at." Chris had the decency to look embarrassed. "Yeah, about that. Taylor said you wanted some private time, and we had that dinner reservation at the Capitol Grill." "A dinner reservation," Eleanor repeated flatly. "You left me stranded at Arlington Cemetery because of a dinner reservation. Look, I'm sorry. Okay, it's been a stressful day for everyone." He gestured around the study. "Did you find Dad's will? Taylor's freaking out about it. Keep saying we need to make sure everything's handled properly." "I haven't even been home an hour," Eleanor said. "I had to get a ride from a stranger because my phone died. And now I find you've broken into the house and destroyed Dad's study." "I didn't break in," Chris protested. "I used my key." He paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Wait, where were you? Taylor said you'd taken an Uber home directly after the burial." Another lie. Eleanor wasn't surprised, but it still stung. "I was standing by his grave until the cemetery closed," she said quietly. In the rain, alone. Chris at least had the grace to look genuinely shocked. "Shit, Ellie, I'm sorry. Taylor told us you'd already left." Before Eleanor could respond, her phone vibrated again in her pocket, apparently still clinging to life. She pulled it out to find 3 missed calls from Taylor and a text from her niece Megan. Grandpa's will, Mom's going ballistic. Call ASAP. I need to charge my phone, Eleanor said, suddenly exhausted. And I need you to leave. Chris, we can discuss Dad's will tomorrow with Stanley Wu, his actual attorney, instead of ransacking his office like thieves. Stanley Wu, Chris's expression changed. Dad was still using that old dinosaur. 40 years, Eleanor confirmed. I've already scheduled a meeting with him in Boston for tomorrow morning. You and Taylor are welcome to join. Chris ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Yeah, about that. I can't make Boston tomorrow. I've got investors flying in from Miami. Can't you just handle it and fill us in? Always the same. Eleanor handling the difficult tasks while her siblings carried on with their lives. Fine, she said. Now please go. I need to clean up this mess and get some rest. After Chris left, Eleanor spent an hour restoring order to the study, carefully reshelving books and organizing papers. As she worked, she kept returning to her father's last words to her. The book, remember. But which book? Harrison's library contained thousands of volumes across 3 floors. She paused, holding a leather-bound copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, his favorite novel, the one he'd read to her as a child. On impulse, she opened it, flipping through the pages. Nothing seemed unusual until she reached the back cover. There, in the binding, was a small bulge. Eleanor carefully pried at the binding, revealing a hidden pocket containing a small digital voice recorder. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. Harrison Mitchell's voice, still strong despite his age, filled the room. Eleanor, if you're listening to this, I'm gone, and you've remembered our code. The book always meant this one. I've made arrangements that may upset your siblings, but they're necessary. Stanley has everything prepared. Trust him, and only him. And remember, I've been watching and listening longer than anyone realizes. You were the only one who never gave me reason to doubt. I love you, my faithful daughter. The recording ended, leaving Eleanor standing in the silent study, clutching the small device like a lifeline. What had her father been watching? What arrangements had he made? And why did she have the unsettling feeling that the ransacked study was just the beginning of her troubles? Dawn broke over the Potomac, painting the Georgetown waterfront in hues of amber and gold as Eleanor loaded her overnight bag into her Volvo. The drive to Boston would take nearly 8 hours, but she'd chosen to drive rather than fly, needing the time alone to process yesterday's events and prepare for whatever Stanley Wu might reveal about her father's will. She'd called Taylor late the previous night after charging her phone, the conversation going exactly as expected. What do you mean you're going to Boston alone? Taylor had demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. Chris said you claimed Dad was still using Stanley Wu. That can't be right. Dad would have updated his legal representation to someone local. Dad trusted Stanley for 40 years, Eleanor had replied calmly. And I'm not claiming anything. I'm telling you what I know. Well, I don't like it. This whole situation feels off. First, you disappear after the funeral. Then this mysterious meeting in Boston. I didn't disappear, Taylor. You left me at Arlington. That's not how I remember it, Taylor had said dismissively. Anyway, I can't possibly make Boston tomorrow. I have 3 client presentations. You'll need to record the meeting or have Stanley send me the documents directly. Always the same script. Taylor questioning, dismissing, then demanding accommodations. Eleanor had ended the call with a promise to update her after the meeting, knowing it wouldn't satisfy her sister but too exhausted to argue further. Now, as she merged onto I-95 North, Eleanor allowed herself to remember the day's earlier events. She'd woken at 5 a.m., unable to sleep, and decided to examine the voice recorder more carefully. There were 12 recordings in total, each labeled with a date from the past year. She'd listened to 3 before her hands began shaking too badly to continue recording number 1. Taylor and Chris arguing in Harrison's study about borrowing money from the old man for Chris's latest business venture. He's got millions just sitting there, Chris had said, and it's all coming to us anyway once he's gone. Not if Eleanor convinces him to donate it all to those teacher charities she's always going on about, Taylor had replied. Besides, the last thing you need is another loan. You still haven't paid back the $100,000 he gave you for that ridiculous food truck concept. At least I asked for it directly. You just manipulate him with that devoted daughter act whenever you need to remodel your Hamptons house. That's different. My renovations are investments. Your business ideas are money pits. Recording number 2, Harrison's birthday dinner. Eleanor had prepared his favorite meal and invited the family. Only Megan had shown up. Where's your mother? Harrison had asked. Paris. Megan replied. Last-minute client meeting. She said to wish you happy birthday. And Chris, Miami, some investor thing. He sent a gift basket, though. It should arrive tomorrow. The recorder had caught Harrison's soft sigh. At least you're here. And Eleanor, of course. Eleanor's always here. Recording number 3. A phone call between Harrison and Taylor. 3 months ago. Dad, I need to talk to you about Eleanor. Taylor had said, I'm worried about her influence over you. Influence? Harrison had sounded genuinely confused. What are you talking about? She's isolating you from the rest of the family, always making excuses why we can't visit, controlling your schedule, your medications. That's absolute nonsense, Harrison had interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. Eleanor has sacrificed everything to care for me. Where were you when I had pneumonia last winter? Where's Chris when the plumbing fails or the roof leaks? Eleanor is the only one who's shown me true loyalty, and I won't sit here and listen to you malign her out of jealousy or guilt. This isn't about guilt, Taylor had protested. I'm genuinely concerned. No, you're not, Harrison had cut in. You're concerned about your inheritance. Let me be clear, I'm of sound mind, and I'm fully aware of who has earned my trust and gratitude. Don't call again with these accusations. Eleanor had turned off the recorder after that, unable to bear more. Her father had known. All this time, he'd been watching, listening, documenting the family dynamics she'd tried so hard to ignore or excuse. Now, crossing into Delaware, she wondered what other revelations awaited her in Boston. The sky had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the Atlantic, matching her unsettled mood. She stopped for gas in Wilmington, and as she was paying, noticed a black SUV with tinted windows pull in behind her Volvo. Something about it triggered a warning bell in her mind. She'd seen the same vehicle 2 stops earlier in Maryland. Cautiously, Eleanor took a circuitous route back to I-95, making several random turns through Wilmington's downtown. The SUV followed at a discreet distance. Not a coincidence. Then, heart racing, she merged back onto the highway, pushing her Volvo above the speed limit. The SUV kept pace, maintaining a distance of several car lengths close enough to follow, far enough to avoid looking obvious to anyone but her. Near the New Jersey Turnpike entrance, traffic slowed to a crawl due to construction. Eleanor watched in her rearview mirror as the SUV maneuvered through traffic to position itself directly behind her. When traffic began moving again, the SUV suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside her car. The driver, a man in sunglasses despite the overcast day, looked directly at her, then deliberately swerved toward her lane. Eleanor reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel to avoid collision. Her Volvo skidded toward the shoulder, tires screeching against wet pavement. For a terrifying moment, she thought she would flip, but somehow she maintained control, bringing the car to a shuddering stop on the shoulder as the SUV sped away. A state trooper who'd witnessed the incident pulled up behind her, lights flashing. Ma'am, are you all right? He asked, approaching her window. Eleanor was shaking, adrenaline coursing through her system. Someone just tried to run me off the road. I saw, the trooper said grimly. Black Suburban, tinted windows, no front plate. Did you get the rear plate? No, Eleanor admitted. It happened so fast. Any idea why someone would target you? Eleanor hesitated. Was this related to her father's will to the recordings, or was she being paranoid? I'm not sure, she said finally. I'm on my way to meet my father's attorney in Boston. My father passed recently. The trooper's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Let me escort you to the next service area. You should probably take a break before continuing. At the Thomas Edison service area, Eleanor sat in the food court, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't taste. Mind racing. Why would someone try to force her off the road? What was in her father's will that might provoke such aggression? She called Stanley Wu's office, reaching his longtime assistant, Margaret. Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Wu has been expecting your call, Margaret said, her voice lowered. He asks that you not come to the office directly. There have been inquiries about your appointment. What kind of inquiries? Eleanor asked, alarm bells ringing louder. 2 individuals claiming to be your siblings called separately, attempting to reschedule or cancel your meeting, and a man visited the office yesterday, asking very specific questions about your father's estate planning. Did he give a name? Victor Dempsey. He presented credentials indicating he works for Taylor Mitchell's firm. Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. Taylor had sent someone to intercept her meeting. Mr. Wu suggests you meet him at the alternative location? Margaret continued. The one your father established for sensitive matters. I don't know about any alternative location. Eleanor admitted. The Prudential Center, top floor restaurant. 6 o'clock. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. The line went dead, leaving Eleanor staring at her phone in disbelief. What had her straight-laced, by-the-book father gotten involved in that required secret meeting locations and counter-surveillance measures? She abandoned her original route, taking back roads through New Jersey and Connecticut, constantly checking for any sign of the black SUV. By late afternoon, she reached Boston, the city's skyline emerging through rain clouds as she approached from the south. The Prudential Center loomed over Back Bay, its 60 stories of glass and steel reflecting the stormy sky. Eleanor parked in the underground garage, took the elevator to the shopping level, then switched elevators twice before reaching the top of the Hub restaurant on the 52nd floor. The hostess directed her to a private dining room in the back. There, gazing out at the panoramic view of Boston Harbor, stood Stanley Wu. At 78, he still cut an impressive figure ramrod straight posture. Immaculate charcoal suit, silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He'd been her father's attorney, confidant, and friend since before Eleanor was born. Eleanor, he said warmly, taking her hands in his. You look just like your mother. It's been too long, Stanley, she replied, genuinely glad to see him. Though I wish the circumstances were different, as do I. He gestured to the table set for two. Please, sit. We have much to discuss, and some of it may be difficult to hear. They ordered drink scotch for him, white wine for her, and made small talk about the drive and the weather until the server had departed and the door was firmly closed. I understand someone tried to run you off the road, Stanley said, his expression grave. News travels fast. Your father arranged for certain protective measures after he began recording your siblings. The state trooper who assisted you works with a security firm we retain. Eleanor set down her wine glass. Stanley, what is going on Dad's recordings, secret meetings, security firms? This isn't the Harrison Mitchell I knew. Stanley sighed deeply. The Harrison you knew was only part of the man. There was another side to him, the prosecutor who never quite stopped seeking justice, even in retirement. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. Before I open this, I need to know, did Harrison ever mention Operation Blackboard to you? Eleanor frowned. No, never. What is it? A case he worked on nearly 15 years ago, involving misappropriation of teacher pension funds. Several high-level financial executives were implicated, but the case was ultimately dropped due to insufficient evidence. Stanley made air quotes around the phrase. Harrison never believed that. He spent years gathering evidence privately, even after retiring. And this connects to his will, how Stanley broke the seal on the envelope and removed a thick document. Because approximately 10 years ago, he discovered something that shook him to his core. Evidence suggesting that Taylor's marketing firm had helped create the investment materials that lured thousands of teachers into the fraudulent pension scheme. Eleanor felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. That's impossible. Taylor wouldn't be involved in something like that. Knowingly, perhaps not, but her firm certainly was. And as a principal partner, she benefited financially. When Harrison confronted her privately, she claimed ignorance but was defensive enough that he began to doubt her. That's when he started watching more carefully. Not just Taylor, but all of you. And Chris. Stanley's expression darkened. Chris borrowed substantial sums from your father over the years, ostensibly for his various business ventures. Harrison eventually discovered he was funneling much of it to cover gambling debts. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, pieces clicking into place. The late-night calls from Chris, the desperate requests for business loans, his constant cash flow problems despite seemingly successful ventures. So, the recordings, the secret security. Harrison was building a case not just regarding his own family's betrayals, but the larger pension fraud that was never properly prosecuted. He believed certain powerful people discovered his private investigation about a year ago. That's when he installed the recording devices and enhanced security. Stanley slid the document across the table. This is his will, as executor. I've already reviewed it in detail. The short version is this: Harrison has left everything to you. Eleanor, the Georgetown house, his investments, the vacation property in Maine, all of it. Approximately $27 million in total assets. Eleanor stared at him, stunned. Everything. But what about Taylor and Chris? There are provisions for them, Stanley said carefully. Conditional bequests that depend on their actions moving forward. What kinds of conditions? First, they must make full financial restitution for all funds they've taken from Harrison over the years, with interest. For Chris, that's approximately $2.3 million. For Taylor, it's less in direct loans, but includes penalties for her firm's involvement in the pension fraud. Second, they must participate in a formal reconciliation process with you, acknowledging their pattern of exploitation and making amends. Third, they must cooperate fully with the federal investigation Harrison initiated before his death, providing all relevant documents and testimony regarding the pension fraud. And if they refuse, then everything remains with you, with the stipulation that a portion be used to establish a legal fund for the teachers who lost their pensions. Eleanor's mind was reeling. The father she thought she knew conservative, traditional, fair to a fault had essentially disinherited his other children unless they atoned for their actions. There's more, Stanley said, lowering his voice further. Harrison believed his investigation led to threats against him. He suspected his recent health decline wasn't entirely natural. Are you suggesting he was murdered? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. He considered it a possibility. That's why he established the security protocols and why I'm meeting you here instead of my office. The FBI has been quietly investigating since he contacted them 3 months ago. Eleanor thought back to her father's sudden decline, the puzzling symptoms that didn't quite match his diagnosed conditions. The doctors had attributed it to age and his heart condition. But what if? The FBI will want to speak with you, Stanley continued, and Agent Lopez has been assigned to the case. She'll contact you soon. Does Taylor know about any of this? The investigation? The conditions in the will? She suspects something, hence her representative visiting my office and likely the attempt to prevent you from reaching me today. Eleanor glanced toward the windows, suddenly feeling exposed. So, what happens now? Now, Stanley said, retrieving a small safe deposit box key from his pocket. You access the final piece of evidence Harrison collected. Everything is at Cambridge Trust Company, Box 1949. The passcode is your mother's birthday. He stood, signaling the end of their meeting. I'll file the will tomorrow morning. By tomorrow afternoon, Taylor and Chris will receive formal notification of the conditions. Be prepared for significant pushback. Stanley, Eleanor said, rising unsteadily. I don't know if I can handle this. I'm a retired school teacher, not a criminal investigator or a warrior. Stanley's expression softened. Harrison knew exactly what you're capable of. Eleanor. He told me once that you were the strongest of his children, not because you were loud or aggressive, but because you had moral courage. That's rarer and more valuable than any other kind of strength. He escorted her to the elevator, holding her arm gently. Be careful going home. The security team will maintain surveillance, but they can't be everywhere. Trust no one except Agent Lopez and myself, not even Megan. Megan, but she's just Taylor's daughter. She's not involved in any of this. Perhaps not, Stanley conceded. But she's a corporate attorney whose client list includes several firms implicated in the pension fraud. Harrison wasn't certain where her loyalties would fall. The elevator arrived, its cheerful ding incongruous with the weight of their conversation. One last thing, Stanley said as the doors opened. Harrison left a letter for you with the safe deposit materials. He wanted you to know that everything he did was to protect you and secure justice, and that he was prouder of you than you could ever know. Eleanor stepped into the elevator, turning to face him as the doors began to close. Did he know at the end that I loved him just as much? Stanley nodded, his eyes glistening. He knew, Eleanor, he always knew. As the elevator descended, Eleanor leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by revelations and unanswered questions. The Harrison Mitchell she thought she knew had been playing a dangerous game of justice and retribution, right under her nose. And now, she was the inheritor not just of his fortune, but of his quest. The elevator reached the ground floor, doors opening to the bustling shopping center. Eleanor stepped out, scanning the crowd reflexively for any sign of surveillance or threat. What had Stanley told her? Trust no one. Her phone vibrated a text from an unknown number. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Special Agent Teresa Lopez with the FBI. We need to meet. Your father's case has developed urgently. The black SUV was just the beginning. Eleanor stared at the message, a chill running through her despite the heated building. The black SUV driver knew who she was, which meant this wasn't just about an inheritance dispute. This was about something much more dangerous. The Cambridge Trust Company's marble lobby echoed with Eleanor's footsteps as she approached the private banking department the following morning. She'd spent a restless night at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, jumping at every sound in the corridor, checking and rechecking the locks on her door. Agent Lopez had arranged to meet her after she retrieved the safe deposit box contents, insisting it was too risky to accompany her to the bank directly. We have reason to believe multiple parties are monitoring financial institutions connected to your father, she'd explained during their brief phone call. The private banker, a silver-haired woman named Mrs. Cahill, greeted Eleanor with practiced discretion, checking her identification and the key Stanley had provided before leading her to the vault area. Your father visited this box frequently over the past year, Mrs. Cahill commented as they reached the secure room. Always very particular about privacy. That sounds like him, Eleanor replied, though, in truth, it didn't sound like the father she thought she knew at all. Left alone in the viewing room with the large metal box, Eleanor took a deep breath before entering her mother's birth date 6/14/32 into the secondary lock. The mechanism clicked, and the lid released. Inside lay several items, a thick manila envelope labeled evidence, a USB drive, a smaller envelope with Eleanor read first, written in her father's distinctive handwriting, and most surprisingly, a 9mm Glock pistol with 2 ammunition clips. Her father had owned a gun, Harrison Mitchell, who'd lectured her on the dangers of firearms her entire life, hands trembling slightly. Eleanor opened the letter first. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I've either passed away naturally or my investigation has led to more dire consequences. I hope it's the former, but I prepared for the latter. By now, Stanley will have explained the basics of what I've been working on and the provisions of my will. What he couldn't tell you because I never told him is how deep the corruption goes. The pension fraud that victimized thousands of teachers wasn't just the work of a few unscrupulous financial executives, it reached into the highest levels of government, with regulatory agencies deliberately looking the other way in exchange for benefits I've documented in the enclosed evidence. Taylor's involvement began innocently enough. Her firm was hired to create marketing materials. But as the scheme's profitability became clear, she made decisions that haunt me to think about. The recordings in my study contain conversations where she admits to altering disclosure documents to hide risk factors from potential investors, many of whom were your colleagues and friends. Chris's gambling provided the perfect pressure point for the people behind this fraud. They used his debts to manipulate him into introducing potential investors to the scheme, targeting wealthy retirees in particular. I've spent the last decade building a case that the FBI could use to finally bring justice to those responsible. 3 months ago, I believed I had enough evidence to move forward. That's when the threats began. The weapon included with these materials is registered legally in my name. I've never fired it, but I obtained it for your protection. Massachusetts recognizes concealed carry permits from the District of Columbia, which I've also included. I pray you never need to use it, but these people have killed before to protect their interests. Eleanor, you've always been the moral center of our family. While Taylor inherited my ambition and Chris my charm, you received the best parts of both your mother and myself: integrity, compassion, and quiet strength. Those qualities may seem like weaknesses in the world we live in, but they're actually the rarest form of power. I've left everything to you because you're the only one I trust to make this right. The FBI has most of this evidence already, but Agent Lopez will need your cooperation to complete the case. Taylor and Chris may yet redeem themselves by cooperating, which is why I've given them a path back through the conditions in my will. I love you, my faithful daughter. I'm sorry to place this burden on your shoulders, but I know you're stronger than you believe yourself to be. Your mother always said you were the one who would change the world. She was right, as she usually was. With all my love and faith, Dad, Eleanor wiped tears from her cheeks, her father's words simultaneously breaking her heart and straightening her spine. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. This was about justice for thousands of victims, including her own former colleagues. She packed everything into her bag, including the pistol, though the weight of it felt alien and disturbing against her hip. The banker escorted her back to the lobby, where Eleanor paused to get her bearings. Through the bank's front windows, she noticed a familiar figure standing across the street, her niece Megan, apparently absorbed in her phone, but positioned with a clear view of the bank entrance. Eleanor's heart sank. Stanley had warned her to trust no one, but seeing Megan actively surveilling her was still a shock. Had Taylor sent her daughter to track Eleanor's movements, slipping out through a side door? Eleanor circled the block before doubling back toward the Fairmont through Boston Common. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Megan's slender figure following, but the park was relatively empty on this chilly morning. Back in her hotel room, Eleanor spread the contents of the manila envelope across the bed: financial statements, transcripts of recorded conversations, photographs of meetings between supposed regulators and financial executives at private clubs and restaurants. Page after page of carefully documented corruption. Her phone buzzed Agent Lopez requesting to move their meeting up. Developments in the case. Meet me at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum in 30 minutes. Public place, security cameras, multiple exits. The museum was busy with school groups when Eleanor arrived. Children in matching t-shirts clustered around colonial costumed guides. She spotted Agent Lopez immediately, a compact Latina woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no nonsense demeanor, sitting alone on a bench overlooking the harbor. Ms. Mitchell, Lopez said as Eleanor approached. Thank you for coming. Did you retrieve the materials? Eleanor nodded, patting her bag. Everything was there, including a gun I had no idea my father owned. Harrison Mitchell was more cautious than most people realized, Lopez replied. We've been working with him for over a year. His evidence is the cornerstone of our case against New Horizon Investments and their government enablers. New Horizon. Eleanor frowned. That's where my niece Megan works as legal counsel. Lopez's expression tightened. Yes, we're aware. That's one of the complications in this case. Family connections that blur the lines between witnesses, potential defendants, and victims. I saw Megan outside the bank this morning. She was watching the entrance. We know. We've had surveillance on your niece since your father first contacted us. She's been in frequent contact with several persons of interest in our investigation. Lopez hesitated, including Victor Dempsey, the man who attempted to run you off the road yesterday. Eleanor felt sick. Megan knows this man, the one who tried to kill me. We don't believe she knows what he attempted. Their communications suggest she thinks he's simply gathering information about your father's will. Lopez checked her watch. We need to move. There's a car waiting that will take you to a secure location where we can review all the materials thoroughly. Wait, Eleanor said, suddenly wary. How do I know I can trust you? Anyone could claim to be FBI. Lopez smiled slightly, pulling out her credentials. Good instinct. Your father asked the same question at our first meeting. He also established a code phrase. He said you would know it was safe to trust me if I mentioned the summer you broke your arm falling from the cherry tree. Eleanor's tension eased slightly. She'd been 8 years old when that happened. Harrison had carried her 3 miles to the hospital because their car wouldn't start. There's one more thing, Lopez added, her voice lowering. We have reason to believe your father was murdered. The autopsy results came back this morning. Traces of thallium were found in his tissue samples, a poison that mimics the symptoms of heart disease. It's why we need to move you to a secure location immediately. Eleanor's world tilted sideways. Murder, the word echoed in her mind, bringing with it images of her father's final days, his progressive weakness, the gastrointestinal symptoms, hair loss the doctors had attributed to chemotherapy from a previous cancer treatment. Who, she managed to ask. We don't know yet, Lopez admitted. But the poison was likely administered over months in small doses. It would have required regular access to his food or medication. The implication hung in the air between them. Regular access. Someone close to Harrison, someone he trusted, someone like a family member. I need to sit down, Eleanor said, legs suddenly unsteady. Lopez took her elbow, guiding her back to the bench. I know this is overwhelming, but right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe while we build our case. The evidence your father gathered, combined with your testimony about the family dynamics, could break this investigation wide open. My testimony against my own sister and brother, potentially, or they might choose to cooperate, as your father hoped. Either way, the first step is getting you somewhere secure. As they stood to leave, Eleanor's phone rang, Taylor's name flashing on the screen. Should I answer it? She asked Lopez. Yes, but don't mention anything about our meeting or the evidence. Keep it brief and non-committal. Eleanor took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello, Taylor? Where the hell are you? Taylor's voice crackled with barely contained fury. Stanley Wu just called with some ridiculous story about Dad's will. He claims everything goes to you unless Chris and I meet some absurd conditions. This is obviously a mistake or a manipulation. It's not a mistake, Taylor, Eleanor interrupted, striving to keep her voice steady. That's what Dad wanted. Bullshit. Taylor's composure shattered. You manipulated him when he was vulnerable. You poisoned him against us while playing the devoted daughter. Well, it won't work. I'm contesting the will, and I've already contacted the police about potential elder abuse. The accusation slammed into Eleanor like a physical blow. Elder abuse after everything she'd sacrificed to care for their father. Taylor, you know that's not true. I cared for Dad because I loved him, not because I wanted his money. Save it for your deposition, Taylor snapped. I've hired Victor Dempsey to investigate you. He's already uncovered some very interesting information about your finances and your so-called selfless caregiving. Victor Dempsey, the man who tried to run her off the road, the man connected to New Horizon. The pieces were fitting together with terrifying clarity. Taylor, listen to me, Eleanor said urgently. You need to be careful who you're trusting right now. There are things about Dad's past you don't understand. No, you listen. Taylor cut in. I'm flying to D.C. tonight. I'll be at the Georgetown house at 9 tomorrow morning with my lawyers. Either you agree to a reasonable division of the estate, or I'll make sure everyone knows how you manipulated a dying old man for financial gain. Your choice. The line went dead. Eleanor lowered the phone, meeting Lopez's concerned gaze. She's hired Victor Dempsey to investigate me, and she's accusing me of elder abuse. Classic projection, Lopez commented. Accuse others of what you yourself are guilty of. It's a common tactic. She took Eleanor's arm gently. All the more reason to get you to safety now. Our car is waiting. As they walked toward the exit, Eleanor glanced back at the harbor, the same waters where colonists had once dumped tea to protest unjust treatment. How fitting that she now stood at the precipice of her own revolution against exploitation and corruption. Her father had been murdered. Her siblings had betrayed not just family trust, but potentially broken laws that harmed thousands. And now, she was being hunted by the very people who had orchestrated it all. Eleanor Mitchell, 68-year-old retired schoolteacher and devoted daughter, was about to become something else entirely, a warrior for justice. The FBI safe house turned out to be a modest Cape Cod-style home in Newburyport, about 40 minutes north of Boston. As the unmarked sedan pulled into the driveway, Eleanor noted the security cameras discreetly positioned around the property and the reinforced front door, subtle signs that this was no ordinary residence. Inside, Agent Lopez introduced her to a small team forensic accountant, Michaels, legal specialist Santos, and a silent, watchful agent named Reed, who Lopez explained would be handling security. We'll need to go through everything you retrieved from the safe deposit box, Lopez said, leading Eleanor to a dining room that had been converted into an investigation hub. But first, I want you to see something. She opened a laptop, pulling up a surveillance photo of Taylor entering a restaurant. This was taken 3 days ago at the Capitol Grill in D.C. Note who she's meeting with. The image zoomed in to show Taylor seated across from a distinguished gray-haired man in an expensive suit. Senator James Holloway, Lopez explained, chairman of the Finance Committee and, according to your father's evidence, one of the key political figures who helped bury the original pension fraud investigation. Eleanor stared at the image, remembering how Taylor had always boasted about her connections in Washington. This doesn't prove Taylor knows about his involvement in the fraud. No, but this might. Lopez swiped to another image, Taylor handing the senator an envelope under the table. We believe this contains documents related to the case that your father had collected, documents that went missing from his study the night before he was hospitalized for the final time. The implications were staggering. If Taylor had stolen evidence from Harrison's study and delivered it to a key suspect, she wasn't just peripherally involved in the fraud, she was actively obstructing justice. What about Chris? Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. Less directly involved, but not innocent, Lopez replied, showing another surveillance photo of Chris meeting with Victor Dempsey at a Miami Beach club. Dempsey isn't just an investigator, he's former CIA, now working as a problem solver for several financial institutions implicated in the fraud, including New Horizon. Eleanor sank into a chair, the weight of these revelations crushing her. And Megan, my niece? Lopez's expression softened slightly. Her involvement is less clear. She's definitely aware of the investigation New Horizons' legal team has been preparing for potential charges for months. But whether she knows about the attempts to sabotage your father's evidence or the surveillance on you remains unclear. For the next several hours, Eleanor worked with the team, going through Harrison's evidence piece by piece. The financial documents revealed a complex web of fraudulent investments, regulatory failures, and millions in kickbacks to officials who should have been protecting pensioners. As the evening wore on, forensic accountant Michaels whistled softly while reviewing a spreadsheet from the USB drive. Your father was thorough. This tracks every penny from the fraudulent funds to offshore accounts, then back to political contributions and real estate purchases. It's the money laundering equivalent of a smoking gun. Will it be enough? Eleanor asked, rubbing her tired eyes. Combined with the recorded conversations and the surveillance we've been conducting, absolutely, Lopez confirmed. The question is whether we can keep this evidence secure until we're ready to move. These people have already killed once to protect themselves. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Aunt Eleanor, it's Megan. Don't tell Mom, but I need to talk to you. It's about Grandpa and what happened to him. I found something in Mom's emails. Meet me tomorrow, the Lincoln Memorial, 10 a.m. She showed the message to Lopez, who frowned. Could be legitimate, could be a trap. Either way, we're not risking your safety. But if Megan has information about Dad's murder, then she can provide it to the FBI directly, Lopez said firmly. We'll respond as if you're planning to meet her, but you'll remain here under protection. After a simple dinner, Eleanor was shown to a bedroom on the second floor. The exhaustion of the past 2 days caught up with her all at once, and she collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, falling into a troubled sleep filled with dreams of her father's voice warning her of dangers she couldn't quite see. She awoke suddenly at 3 a.m. to the sound of Agent Reed's voice in the hallway, speaking urgently into a phone, pulling on a robe. Eleanor opened her door. "What's happening?" she asked. Reed's expression was grim. "There's been a break-in at the Georgetown house. The security system captured multiple intruders ransacking the place, focusing particularly on your father's study and your bedroom. Was anything taken? We won't know until you can review the footage and tell us what might be missing. But they were clearly looking for something specific." Eleanor thought of the voice recorder she'd left hidden in her sock drawer, containing the remaining conversations she hadn't listened to yet. "I need to see that footage now." Downstairs, Lopez was already reviewing the security feed on her laptop. 3 individuals, highly professional, using signal jammers and counter-surveillance techniques. They disabled most of the cameras, but missed one your father had concealed in a bookshelf. The grainy night vision footage showed black-clad figures methodically searching the study, pulling books from shelves, checking behind picture frames, even removing air vents to look inside the walls. "Stop," Eleanor said suddenly. "Go back." Lopez rewound the footage. Eleanor pointed to the screen. "That one, the leader. He's checking his phone, and the screen is illuminating his face." Lopez zoomed in, enhancing the image. The man's features were partially visible: a strong jaw, close-cropped hair, and most distinctively, a scar running from his left eye to his ear. "Victor Dempsey," Lopez confirmed. "This just tied Taylor directly to the break-in. If she hired him as an investigator, and he's conducting illegal searches of your property—" "She's not just investigating," Eleanor finished. "She's destroying evidence." Another agent entered with a printout. "We've got a problem. Taylor Mitchell booked a flight to Boston, arriving at Logan in 3 hours, and Chris Mitchell's private jet filed a flight plan from Miami to Boston, arriving around the same time." Lopez swore under her breath. "They're converging here. Someone tipped them off about the safe deposit box." She turned to Eleanor. "We need to move you again. They obviously know you're in the Boston area." "No," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her firmness. "I'm tired of running. If they want to confront me, let them. But let's do it on our terms, with you and your team present." Lopez studied her thoughtfully. "You want to use yourself as bait?" "I want to see their faces when I confront them with what I know," Eleanor corrected. "Dad spent years building this case while maintaining family relationships. I owe it to him to at least try to give Taylor and Chris a chance to cooperate, just as he wanted." After a moment's consideration, Lopez nodded. "We can arrange a controlled meeting. But you'll wear a wire, and we'll have agents positioned throughout the location." She checked her watch. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The Lincoln Memorial stood majestic against the clear blue October sky. Tourists and school groups climbing the steps where Martin Luther King Jr. had once delivered his dream of a more just America. Eleanor sat on a bench facing the reflecting pool, the Washington Monument rising in the distance, a perfect D.C. postcard view that belied the tension of the moment. Per the FBI's plan, she'd flown back to D.C. that morning, accompanied by Agent Lopez and 2 others posing as tourists. Now she waited, scanning the crowds for any sign of Megan, Taylor, or Chris. She didn't have to wait long. Megan appeared first, climbing the memorial steps alone, her slender figure distinct in a red coat despite the distance. Eleanor raised her hand in greeting, but before Megan could reach her, a black town car pulled up to the curb, and Taylor emerged, followed by Chris. "They're both here," Eleanor murmured for the benefit of the wire she wore. This wasn't coincidence. They coordinated. She watched as Taylor intercepted Megan, an animated discussion ensuing between them. Megan appeared distressed, gesturing toward Eleanor, while Taylor gripped her daughter's arm tightly. After a moment, they both approached, with Chris trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. "Eleanor," Taylor said coldly as they reached the bench. At 63, Taylor Mitchell remained a striking woman, tall, imperiously slender, with expertly colored blonde hair and the kind of tailored clothing that whispered rather than shouted its expense. "I see you're still running away from your responsibilities." "I'm sitting right here in the open," Eleanor replied calmly. "Hardly running?" "You know what I mean," Taylor snapped. "Stanley Wu says you've accepted Dad's ridiculous will conditions. You're actually going through with this farce." "It's not a farce, Taylor. It's what Dad wanted." What Dad wanted when he was being manipulated and poisoned against his own children. Taylor's voice rose, drawing glances from passing tourists. You had his ear for years, filling it with lies while the rest of us were building careers and raising families. Eleanor met her sister's gaze steadily. Is that why you sent Victor Dempsey to search the house last night, looking for evidence of my manipulation? Taylor faltered momentarily, caught off guard. I don't know what you're talking about. The security cameras caught him. Taylor, breaking and entering, destruction of property felony charges. Interesting choice for an investigator. Chris stepped forward, his expression anxious. Look, Eleanor, we just want to be reasonable about this. Dad's estate should be divided equally. Whatever grievances he thought he had against us at the end, we're still his children. Grievances? Eleanor repeated. Is that what you call it when your children exploit you for money, ignore you when you're ill, and possibly even contribute to crimes that harm thousands of innocent people? Megan gasped, her eyes darting between her mother and her aunt. What is she talking about, Mom? Taylor's face hardened. Nothing. Your aunt is delusional. The stress of caregiving has clearly affected her judgment. Tell her about New Horizon. Taylor, Eleanor said quietly. Tell her about the pension fraud that stole retirement funds from thousands of teachers. Tell her about your meetings with Senator Holloway. The color drained from Taylor's face. You're being ridiculous. I've met the senator at various fundraisers. That's hardly a crime. And the documents you passed to him under the table 3 days ago, were those just fundraising materials too? You've been spying on me. Taylor's shock quickly morphed to outrage. How dare you? Not me, Eleanor corrected. The FBI. They've been building a case for months based on evidence Dad collected. Evidence about New Horizons fraud and the political figures who helped cover it up. Megan had gone pale. Mom, what is Aunt Eleanor talking about? Taylor grabbed her daughter's arm. Don't listen to her. She's making wild accusations to justify stealing your grandfather's estate. Am I? Eleanor reached into her bag and withdrew printed copies of some of Harrison's evidence, the surveillance photos of Taylor with Holloway, financial records showing the money trail from fraudulent investments to offshore accounts and back. Dad documented everything. Taylor, every meeting, every transaction, every lie. Chris sank onto the bench, his face ashen as he stared at the documents. Taylor, what the hell have you gotten us into? Nothing. Taylor insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. This is all circumstantial. Nothing here proves any wrongdoing on my part. What about the thallium, Taylor? Eleanor asked softly. What? The poison found in Dad's system during the autopsy. The one that mimics heart disease symptoms and requires regular administration over months. Someone with regular access to his food or medication. Taylor's expression shifted from defiance to horror. You think I poisoned Dad, my own father? That's insane. Is it you had the most to lose if his evidence went public? Your firm would be implicated, your reputation destroyed, possible criminal charges. Stop it, Megan cried, tears streaming down her face. This is why I wanted to meet you alone. Aunt Eleanor, I found emails on Mom's computer correspondence with someone named Victor about handling the Harrison-Mitchell problem. I was afraid. I thought maybe. She couldn't finish the sentence. Taylor released her daughter's arm as if burned. You went through my emails, Megan. Those were about the will contestation, nothing more. Victor Dempsey is a private investigator I hired to build our case. A private investigator who tried to run me off the road in New Jersey. Eleanor asked, who broke into Dad's house, who has connections to the very financial institutions under investigation for fraud. Chris stood suddenly. I'm not part of this. Whatever Taylor's involved in, I didn't know about it. I just needed money for my businesses. Businesses funded by your gambling debts, Eleanor said. Dad knew about those too. Chris, he documented the money trail how you funneled his loans to pay off bookies and then introduced those same criminal elements to New Horizon as potential investors. Chris's face contorted with shame and anger. That's not I didn't know what they were doing with the introductions. I was just trying to pay off my debts by exploiting Dad's generosity and betraying his trust, Eleanor finished. A tense silence fell over the group, punctuated only by Megan's quiet sobs and the ambient sounds of tourists exploring the memorial. What happens now? Taylor finally asked, her voice subdued. That depends on you, Eleanor replied. Dad's will gives you both a path to redemption. Cooperate with the FBI investigation. Make restitution for the money you've taken from him over the years, and commit to treating family relationships with respect and reciprocity moving forward. And if we refuse, Taylor's chin lifted defiantly, Then I inherit everything, and a significant portion goes to establish a legal fund for the teachers who lost their pensions. And the FBI continues their investigation with or without your cooperation. As if on cue, Agent Lopez approached from where she'd been sitting nearby. Badge displayed. Taylor Mitchell, Christopher Mitchell. I'm Special Agent Teresa Lopez with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into financial fraud and potential obstruction of justice. Taylor's eyes darted around, looking for escape routes, but other agents had quietly positioned themselves nearby. This is harassment, she sputtered. I'm calling my attorney. That's your right, Lopez agreed, though you might want to find one not employed by New Horizon. Given the circumstances, Chris seemed to deflate entirely, the fight going out of him. I'll cooperate, he said quietly. I never meant for any of this to happen. Megan wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. I want to cooperate too. I didn't know about any of this, but if New Horizon is involved in fraud, I won't be part of covering it up. Taylor stared at her daughter and brother in disbelief. You're both turning on me after everything I've done for this family. What exactly have you done for this family? Taylor, Eleanor asked gently. Besides take and take and take while giving nothing in return. For the first time in Eleanor's memory, Taylor Mitchell had no ready response. She stood silent, the carefully constructed facade of the successful, confident businesswoman crumbling to reveal something smaller and more vulnerable beneath. Ms. Mitchell, Lopez said professionally, we're not arresting you at this time, but we do require your presence for questioning. You can come voluntarily, or we can make this more official. Taylor's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, I'll come, but I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present. As Lopez led Taylor toward a waiting vehicle, Megan approached Eleanor hesitantly. Aunt Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was happening. When I found those emails, I couldn't believe Mom might be involved in something illegal, much less. She couldn't finish the sentence. I know, sweetheart, Eleanor said, embracing her niece. Your grandfather knew you weren't part of this. He just wasn't sure where your loyalties would fall when everything came to light. With the truth, Megan said firmly. Always with the truth. Chris lingered awkwardly nearby, waiting until Megan stepped away before approaching. Eleanor, there's no excuse for what I've done. The gambling, the loans, the lies. I've been a terrible brother and son. Yes, you have. Eleanor agreed, unwilling to soften the truth. I want to make it right, not just to keep my inheritance, but because Dad deserved better. You deserved better. Eleanor studied her brother's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with the fear and shame. Dad believed people could change. Chris, that's why he included the conditions in his will instead of cutting you out entirely. He wanted to give you a chance to become the man he always believed you could be. Chris nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I won't waste that chance. I promise. As FBI agents escorted Chris to another vehicle, Eleanor remained on the bench, gazing up at Lincoln's solemn marble face. The great emancipator who had fought to free others from bondage would appreciate the irony today. Eleanor Mitchell had begun to free herself from decades of family exploitation. Agent Lopez returned, sitting beside her. You did well, better than we expected. Actually, Taylor's reaction to the thallium accusation was particularly telling. You think she did poison him? The evidence suggests someone did. Whether it was Taylor directly or someone she hired remains to be seen. But her reaction wasn't just shock or outrage. There was recognition there. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. The reality of her sister potentially murdering their father, still too painful to fully process. What happens now? We question them separately, see what they're willing to reveal. Chris seems ready to cooperate fully. Megan, too, though her involvement appears minimal. Taylor will be tougher, but the evidence is substantial. And me, what do I do now? Lopez smiled slightly. Now, Ms. Mitchell, you go home, reclaim your father's house, begin to live the life he wanted for you, one free from exploitation and obligation. Our protective detail will remain in place until we've neutralized all potential threats. But there's no reason you can't start moving forward. Forward, such a simple concept, yet so foreign after decades of living for others. Eleanor thought of the Georgetown townhouse, once her father's domain, now hers to shape as she wished. She thought of the trips she'd deferred, the hobbies she'd abandoned, the friends she'd neglected, all sacrificed on the altar of family obligation. I'm not sure I remember how to live for myself, she admitted. Your father anticipated that, Lopez said, retrieving an envelope from her jacket. He left this with me, to be delivered once you confronted your siblings. He called it your freedom map. Eleanor accepted the envelope with trembling hands, opening it to find a handwritten letter and what appeared to be an itinerary. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, you've taken the first difficult steps toward reclaiming your life. I'm proud of you for having the courage to stand up for yourself and for justice. Enclosed, you'll find an itinerary for the trip you've always dreamed of taking: the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the national parks you've talked about visiting since you were a young teacher. All arrangements have been made, all expenses covered. It's my final gift to you: the freedom to explore, to breathe, to live on your own terms. You've spent your life giving to others. Now it's time to give to yourself. The world is wide and wonderful. Eleanor, go see it with the same open heart and keen mind you've always possessed. Remember that the greatest gift you can give to those who truly love you is your own happiness. I will be with you in spirit on every mountain peak and canyon rim. With all my love. Dad. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope as tears blurred her vision. Even in death, Harrison Mitchell was looking after her, encouraging her to spread her wings after a lifetime of being caged by others' expectations. He was a remarkable man, your father, Lopez observed quietly. Yes, Eleanor agreed, rising from the bench. He was. And I think it's time I started honoring his legacy by becoming the woman he always knew I could be. As she descended the memorial steps, Eleanor felt something shift within her, a burden lifting, a door opening. Ahead lay uncertainty, potential danger, and the painful process of rebuilding family relationships on healthier foundations. But for the first time in decades, Eleanor Mitchell was walking toward a future that belonged to her alone, and it felt like freedom. The Georgetown townhouse looked different somehow as Eleanor climbed the familiar front steps 2 days after the confrontation at the Lincoln Memorial. Same brick facade, same black shutters, same brass knocker that needed polishing, yet it felt transformed, as if the house itself had shed a weight. Or perhaps it was Eleanor who had changed. She unlocked the door, noting that the FBI team had already replaced the lock damage during the break-in. Inside, the house still bore signs of the intruder's search books askew on shelves, drawers not quite closed properly, picture frames hanging slightly off kilter. But underneath the disorder was something new possibility. For the first time, Eleanor saw the house not as her father's domain where she was the caretaker, but as her own space to shape according to her preferences. The heavy drapes in the living room that blocked natural light could be replaced. The formal furniture arranged for Harrison's professional visitors could be reoriented for comfort and conversation. The kitchen could finally get the renovation she'd gently suggested for years. Making plans already, Eleanor turned to find Oprah Madison standing in the doorway, a casserole dish in her hands and a knowing smile on her face. At 75, Oprah remained a force of nature, retired federal judge, community activist, and Eleanor's closest friend in Georgetown. Just daydreaming, Eleanor admitted, accepting the dish. Chicken and wild rice. Your favorite, Oprah confirmed, stepping inside and surveying the disorder. I see our friends in law enforcement haven't quite mastered the art of tidying up after themselves. This was actually Victor Dempsey and his team, Eleanor explained. Though the FBI added their own brand of disruption during the evidence collection yesterday, Oprah snorted. That man. I knew he was trouble the moment I saw him skulking around your father's house last month. Told Harrison as much. Eleanor set the casserole down, startled. You knew Dad was being watched. Of course I did. Former federal judge. Remember, I noticed these things. Oprah settled herself into an armchair. Harrison and I had several conversations about his investigation. He was worried about you. You know, afraid of what might happen when everything came to light. You knew about the investigation too, Dad told you. Who do you think introduced him to Agent Lopez? Oprah smiled at Eleanor's shocked expression. Teresa and I worked together on several cases before I retired. When Harrison approached me with his concerns about potential pension fraud, I knew exactly who could help. Eleanor sank onto the sofa, processing this revelation. So, you've been part of this all along, watching out for Dad. For me? Someone had to, Oprah said simply. You were so busy taking care of everyone else, you never noticed who was taking care of you. The words struck Eleanor with unexpected force, bringing tears to her eyes. How many times in her life had she failed to recognize the support offered to her because she was so focused on supporting others? I've been a fool, haven't I? She said quietly. Not a fool, Oprah corrected. Just someone who learned too well to put others first. It's not a character flaw. Eleanor, it's a habit one you can unlearn. The doorbell rang. interrupting their conversation. Eleanor opened it to find Agent Lopez on the doorstep, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man in a gray suit. Ms. Mitchell, Lopez greeted her. I hope we're not intruding. This is Assistant Director Callahan. He's overseeing the New Horizon investigation personally now. Eleanor invited them in, making introductions to Oprah, who exchanged a warm hug with Lopez before fixing Callahan with an appraising look. James Callahan, she said thoughtfully. You clerked for Justice Brennan in the 90s, didn't you? Callahan looked surprised. I did, Your Honor, though it's been many years since anyone's recognized me from those days. I never forget a promising legal mind, Oprah replied with a smile. Now, what news do you bring our Eleanor, Lopez, and Callahan exchanged glances before Callahan spoke. We've made significant progress in the past 48 hours. Christopher Mitchell has provided a full confession regarding his involvement, including details about how he was coerced through his gambling debts to introduce potential investors to the fraudulent pension scheme. And Taylor, Eleanor asked, bracing herself. More resistant, Lopez admitted. She's retained counsel from Williams and Connolly and is denying direct knowledge of the fraud. However, her position weakened considerably when we executed a search warrant at her Chicago residence and found documents your father had reported missing, including evidence linking Senator Holloway directly to regulatory decisions that benefited New Horizon. What about the poisoning? Eleanor struggled to say the word. Callahan's expression darkened. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Financial records show Taylor purchased thallium compounds through a chemical supply company connected to one of her clients. We're still building that part of the case. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. The reality of her sister's potential actions still too painful to fully comprehend. And Megan, fully cooperating, Lopez assured her. She's provided access to New Horizons' internal communications that reveal awareness of the fraud at the highest levels of the company. Her testimony will be invaluable. What happens now? Eleanor asked. The investigation continues, with arrests expected within the week. Senator Holloway has already announced a medical leave of absence, which suggests he's been tipped off. As for your family specifically, Callahan hesitated. Christopher will likely face minimal charges in exchange for his cooperation. Lopez continued. Megan appears to be in the clear, as there's no evidence she knew about the fraud before discovering her mother's emails. Taylor, she sighed. Taylor is facing serious charges, from obstruction of justice to potential involvement in your father's death. The room fell silent, the weight of these revelations settling over them like a shroud. I need to see her, Eleanor said suddenly. Taylor. Lopez frowned. That's not advisable during an ongoing investigation. I need to look her in the eye and ask if she killed our father, Eleanor insisted. I need to hear her answer, whatever it is. Callahan and Lopez exchanged concerned glances. It could compromise the case, Callahan began, but Oprah interrupted. Or it could provide exactly the breakthrough you need, she argued. Taylor might maintain her facade with FBI agents, but facing her sister, the sister she's exploited and underestimated for decades, might crack that veneer. It would need to be carefully controlled, Lopez said slowly, warming to the idea. Recorded, with agents present. And it can't appear coercive, Callahan added. She'd need to agree to the meeting voluntarily. She'll agree, Eleanor said with certainty. Taylor has always believed she can manipulate me. She'll see this as an opportunity to do just that, to convince me to drop the conditions in Dad's will and split the estate regardless of the criminal investigation. Callahan nodded thoughtfully. It could work. We'll need to prepare you what to say, what to avoid. I know my sister, Eleanor replied with quiet confidence. I've spent a lifetime studying her tactics while she never bothered to understand me at all. That's going to be her downfall. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago was a stark, imposing structure of concrete and steel, a far cry from the luxury Taylor Mitchell had surrounded herself with throughout her adult life. Eleanor followed a guard through sterile corridors, the institutional smell of disinfectant and despair making her stomach clench. Taylor had been detained after the FBI search of her home revealed not only Harrison's stolen documents, but also a burner phone linking her directly to Victor Dempsey during the time of the break-in at the Georgetown house. She wasn't officially charged with Harrison's murder yet, but the circumstantial evidence was mounting. The interview room was small and austere, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a large mirror that Eleanor knew concealed observers on the other side. Lopez and Callahan would be watching, along with Taylor's attorney, who had reluctantly agreed to the meeting after Taylor insisted. When the door opened and Taylor entered, Eleanor barely recognized her sister. Gone was the imperious executive in designer clothing. This Taylor wore a beige jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame, her normally perfect hair flat and lifeless, her face stripped of makeup and confidence. "Eleanor," she said flatly, taking the seat across the table. "Come to gloat." "No." Eleanor replied honestly. "I came to understand." Taylor laughed bitterly. "Understand how it feels to have your life destroyed overnight, how it feels to be betrayed by your own family." "I think I know quite a bit about betrayal," Eleanor said quietly. Taylor's eyes flashed. "This moral superiority act is getting old. You're not some innocent victim, Eleanor. You manipulated Dad for years, positioning yourself as the only good child while Chris and I built careers and raised families. Is that really what you believe happened?" "It's what happened," Taylor insisted. "You had his ear every day. We only saw him at holidays and special occasions. Of course he had a distorted view of us." Eleanor studied her sister's face, seeing not just anger, but genuine conviction. Taylor truly believed she was the wronged party, a cognitive distortion so profound it bordered on delusion. "Taylor," she said gently, "when was the last time you called Dad just to check on him? Not to ask for something or discuss business, but just to see how he was doing?" Taylor's brow furrowed. "I'm a busy person. Dad understood that. When Mom died, who arranged the funeral, who sorted through her belongings, who sat with Dad every night for months while he grieved." "You did," Taylor admitted reluctantly. "But you were already there. It made sense. And when Dad had pneumonia last winter, when he needed someone to drive him to chemotherapy appointments the year before, when the roof leaked during that terrible storm 3 years ago." "This is pointless," Taylor snapped. "So you were the dutiful daughter? Congratulations. That doesn't justify Dad cutting us out of his will or you cooperating with this witch hunt against me." Eleanor leaned forward. "Do you know what I found in Dad's study after he died? Recordings? Taylor. Dozens of them. Conversations where you and Chris discussed him as if he were a bank account rather than a person. Conversations where you accused me of manipulating him when you were the one with something to hide." Taylor paled slightly but maintained her defiant posture. "Dad had no right to record private conversations. He had every right to protect himself from exploitation," Eleanor countered. "And that's what was happening, wasn't it? You were using him, his money, his connections, his reputation to further your own interests. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then explain why you were meeting with Senator Holloway 3 days after Dad died. Explain why you hired Victor Dempsey to break into the Georgetown house. Explain why you had thallium compounds delivered to your office last year." At the mention of thallium, Taylor's composure cracked visibly. Her hands, resting on the table, began to tremble. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "I think you do," Eleanor persisted. "I think you realized Dad was building a case that would implicate you in the pension fraud. I think you decided to silence him before he could finish his work. And when that failed, when I inherited his evidence and his mission, you tried to silence me too." "No." Taylor shook her head vehemently. "No, that's not what happened." "Then what did happen? Taylor, tell me. Help me understand how my sister could be involved in something so terrible." Taylor's eyes darted to the observation mirror, then back to Eleanor. "I can't talk about this." "Yes, you can," Eleanor urged. "If not for the investigation, then for me. For the lifetime of sisterhood, that should mean something, even now." Something crumbled in Taylor's expression, a wall that had stood for decades, suddenly developing cracks. "You don't understand the pressure," she said, her voice barely audible. "When New Horizon became my biggest client, I didn't ask questions about their investment strategies. I just created the marketing materials they wanted. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already implicated. And Dad? Did he confront you about it?" Taylor nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "About a year ago, he'd figured it all out. How my firm had helped disguise the riskier aspects of the pension investments, how we'd targeted teacher retirement funds specifically because they were less sophisticated investors. He was so disappointed. Eleanor, the way he looked at me." She shuddered. "I'd never seen that expression on his face before." "So you decided to poison him," Eleanor said softly, "to stop his investigation?" "No." Taylor's denial was vehement. "I didn't poison Dad. I would never." She stopped abruptly. "But you know who did?" Eleanor finished for her. "Don't you?" Taylor's silence was answer enough. "Victor Dempsey," Eleanor guessed. "You told him about Dad's investigation, and he took matters into his own hands." Taylor's shoulders slumped in defeat. "It wasn't supposed to be fatal," she whispered. "Just enough to make him confused, to discredit his claims if he went public. Victor said the dosage was safe, that it would just make Dad appear mentally compromised." The confession hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Even expecting it, hearing Taylor admit her role in their father's death was devastating. He suffered. Taylor, she said, her voice breaking. For months, I watched him deteriorate, thinking it was natural, thinking it was just age and his heart condition. Do you have any idea what that was like? I'm sorry, Taylor whispered, tears flowing freely now. I never meant for him to die. I just wanted to protect myself, my career, everything I built, at any cost, Eleanor said. Even Dad's life, even mine, when you sent Victor to run me off the road. Taylor's head snapped up. What? No, I never authorized that. I hired Victor to investigate you, yes, and to recover any damaging documents from the house, but I never told him to hurt you. Eleanor studied her sister's face, seeing genuine shock there. Then Victor was acting on someone else's orders as well. Someone higher up in the conspiracy who saw me as a threat. Holloway, Taylor said immediately. It had to be. He was terrified when I told him about Dad's evidence. He's the one who insisted I hire Victor to clean things up. He must have given Victor separate instructions. The door opened, and Agent Lopez stepped in. I think we've heard enough. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your cooperation. Taylor seemed to suddenly realize the full implications of what she'd confessed. I want immunity, she said quickly. For testifying against Holloway and Dempsey, that will be for the prosecutors to decide, Lopez replied noncommittally. But your cooperation will certainly be noted. As Lopez led Taylor from the room, the sisters' eyes met one final time. In Taylor's gaze, Eleanor saw something she'd never witnessed before, genuine remorse, mixed with a dawning recognition of who Eleanor truly was. Not the passive doormat Taylor had always assumed, but a woman of quiet strength and unshakable integrity. I underestimated you, Taylor said softly. All these years, I thought you were weak. I was wrong. I know, Eleanor replied simply. Goodbye, Taylor. When the door closed behind them, Eleanor remained seated, processing the revelations of the past half hour. Her sister hadn't directly poisoned their father, but she'd set in motion the events that led to his death. The distinction felt meaningful, yet insufficient a technicality that couldn't erase the betrayal. Callahan entered a moment later, his expression somber but satisfied. That was excellent work, Ms. Mitchell. You got more from her in 30 minutes than our investigators did in 2 days of questioning. Will it be enough, Eleanor asked, for justice, combined with the financial evidence and Christopher's testimony? Absolutely. We'll have Senator Holloway in custody by nightfall, and Dempsey can't hide forever. His face is on every law enforcement database in the country now. Eleanor nodded, feeling hollow despite the victory. Justice was being served. But at what cost? Her family lay in ruins, their relationships perhaps damaged beyond repair. What happens now? She asked, echoing the question that had become her refrain in recent days. Now, Callahan said gently, you go live your life, the one your father wanted for you, or the one you deserve after all these years of sacrifice. The Grand Canyon stretched before Eleanor, a vast chasm of red and gold bathed in the glow of sunset. She stood at the south rim, camera in hand, trying to capture the immensity of the view while knowing no photograph could ever do it justice. 2 weeks had passed since her confrontation with Taylor. In that time, the New Horizon investigation had exploded into national headlines. Senator Holloway had been arrested attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. Victor Dempsey had been apprehended at the Canadian border with a suitcase full of cash and a new identity. Several executives from New Horizon were cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. The scandal had rocked Wall Street and Washington, with calls for new regulations to protect pension funds and stricter oversight of financial institutions. Harrison Mitchell was being hailed as a hero in some circles, the tireless private citizen whose years of investigation had finally exposed corruption at the highest levels. Eleanor had watched the news coverage from a safe distance, following her father's itinerary from the Grand Canyon to Bryce Canyon to Zion National Park. Each day brought new wonders, new perspectives, new opportunities to rediscover who she was beyond her roles as daughter, caretaker, and family peacekeeper. Beautiful, isn't it? Eleanor turned to find Megan standing beside her, gazing out at the canyon with wonder. Her niece had flown in that morning to join her for this portion of the journey, a surprise arranged by Agent Lopez, who had cleared Megan to travel once her involvement in the investigation was complete. It makes you feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to something eternal, Eleanor replied. I wish I hadn't waited so long to see it. Better late than never, Megan said, linking her arm through her aunt's. That seems to be our family motto these days. They watched in companionable silence as the sun slipped lower, casting longer shadows across the canyon depths. Mom's agreed to a plea deal, Megan said finally. 10 years, possibly less with good behavior. She's providing evidence against everyone involved in the conspiracy. Eleanor nodded, having expected as much. And Chris, probation and community service, in exchange for his testimony. He's also entering a treatment program for his gambling addiction. Megan hesitated. He asked me to tell you, he's committed to meeting the conditions in Grandpa's will. He wants to make amends. For real. I believe him, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the realization that she did. Chris was always more weak than malicious. Taylor was the calculating one. And me? Megan asked quietly. Where do I fit in this family narrative? Eleanor turned to face her niece, seeing both Taylor's determined chin and Harrison's thoughtful eyes. You're the future, Megan, the one who can learn from all our mistakes and build something better. Megan's eyes filled with tears. I keep thinking about Grandpa, how he knew something was wrong but kept trying to protect us all anyway. How he created a path for Mom and Uncle Chris to redeem themselves, even knowing what they'd done. That was your grandfather, Eleanor said, smiling at the memories, always believing people could be better than their worst actions, always fighting for justice without sacrificing compassion. He reminds me of you, Megan observed. Or maybe you remind me of him. Either way, I'm grateful to have at least one family member I can look up to without reservation. The simple sincerity of her niece's words touched Eleanor deeply. For so long, she'd been the family member taken for granted, her contributions minimized or ignored. To be seen and valued by Megan felt like a precious gift. What will you do now? Megan asked as they began walking back toward the lodge. After this trip, I'm not entirely sure, Eleanor admitted. The Georgetown house is mine, but it holds so many memories, not all of them pleasant anymore. I might sell it, buy something smaller. And your retirement Grandpa left you well provided for. Eleanor smiled. Yes, he did. I'm thinking of establishing a foundation, something to help retired teachers who lost their pensions in the fraud. Dad would have wanted that. He would have loved it, Megan agreed. The Harrison Mitchell Justice Foundation. It has a nice ring to it. As they reached the lodge, Eleanor spotted a familiar figure waiting on the porch. Chris, looking thinner and humbler than she'd ever seen him. I hope it's okay that I came too, he said hesitantly as they approached. I wanted to see you in person, to apologize properly. Eleanor studied her brother, noting the absence of his usual charm and bluster. This Chris was subdued, his eyes clear and direct without the evasiveness she'd grown accustomed to. I'm glad you're here, she said simply, and meant it. That evening, the three of them shared dinner at the lodge restaurant, talking more openly than they had in years. Chris spoke candidly about his gambling addiction and the shame that had driven him to exploit their father's generosity. Megan shared her plans to leave corporate law and focus on advocating for financial regulation reform. Eleanor described the national parks she'd visited and the profound impact the journey was having on her sense of self. I've spent my whole life being defined by my relationships to other people, she explained, sipping her wine thoughtfully. Daughter, sister, wife, caretaker. For the first time, I'm discovering who Eleanor Mitchell is on her own terms. And who is she? Chris asked with genuine interest. Eleanor considered the question. Someone stronger than I realized. Someone who values justice, but believes in redemption. Someone who's finally learning that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. I wish I'd understood that sooner, Chris said ruefully. It might have saved us all a lot of pain. It's not too late, Eleanor replied, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Dad believed that, and so do I. Later, standing on the balcony of her room under a canopy of stars, more brilliant than any she'd seen in D.I.C., Eleanor reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From devoted daughter to reluctant detective to family truth-teller roles she'd never anticipated but had somehow grown to fill. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Lopez. Dempsey talking. Confirmed Holloway ordered the hit on you. All targets in custody. You're safe now. Safe. The word resonated with unexpected power. Safe to travel alone. Safe to make her own choices. Safe to reclaim her life after decades of putting others first. Eleanor looked up at the vast expanse of stars, imagining her father somewhere among them, watching with approval as she finally embraced the freedom he'd wanted for her. I'm learning, Dad, she whispered to the night sky. I'm finally learning. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the renovated living room of the Georgetown townhouse, surveying the transformation. Gone were the heavy drapes that had kept the space perpetually dim, replaced by sheer panels that allowed sunlight to stream across new hardwood floors. Harrison's formal furniture had been donated to his alma mater's law school, making way for comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation rather than intimidate visitors. The walls, once covered with legal diplomas and austere family portraits, now displayed colorful photographs from Eleanor's travels, the Grand Canyon at sunset, Yellowstone's geysers erupting against azure skies, Zion's majestic cliffs reaching toward heaven. "It looks like you now," Oprah observed, accepting a glass of wine from Eleanor. "Warm, inviting, unpretentious." "That's the nicest compliment you could give me," Eleanor replied, settling into her favorite new acquisition, a reading chair positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. They'd gathered to celebrate the official launch of the Harrison Mitchell Justice Foundation, which would use a significant portion of Eleanor's inheritance to provide legal and financial support to victims of the pension fraud. The first grants had been awarded that morning in a ceremony at the National Press Club, generating favorable coverage across multiple media outlets. "Have you seen the Times article?" Oprah asked, pulling up the story on her tablet. "They're calling Harrison the citizen crusader who brought down a conspiracy that spanned Wall Street and Washington." Eleanor smiled, imagining how her father would have reacted to such publicity, embarrassed by the attention, but quietly pleased that justice had prevailed. He never wanted recognition. He just wanted things made right. "Speaking of making things right," Oprah said, glancing toward the foyer, "your brother's here." Chris entered carrying a small gift bag, looking healthier than he had at the Grand Canyon. 6 months of Gamblers Anonymous and therapy had worked subtle changes in his demeanor, less frenetic energy, more thoughtful presence. "The place looks amazing, Ellie," he said, embracing her. "Really suits you." "Thanks. How was your flight?" "Fine. Direct from Miami, for once." He handed her the gift bag. "A little housewarming present, though I guess it's more of a house rewarming." Inside was a framed photograph Eleanor hadn't seen in years herself, at about 10 years old, sitting beside Harrison on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, both licking ice cream cones and laughing at some forgotten joke. "Where did you find this?" she asked, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "In Mom's old albums. I've been going through things, trying to understand our family better." Chris shrugged, a little embarrassed by his sentimentality. "You two always had a special connection. I think I was jealous of it, to be honest." "You could have had it too," Eleanor said gently. "Dad always wanted to be close to you. I know that now. Too late for him, but maybe not too late for us." The doorbell interrupted their moment, announcing the arrival of more guests, former colleagues from Eleanor's teaching days, friends from the neighborhood, Agent Lopez and her husband, Stanley Wu leaning on a cane, but still sharp as ever at 79. Last to arrive was Megan, accompanied by David, her husband, and their children, Emma and Jack, who immediately began exploring the renovated house with the unbridled curiosity of the young. "Can we see the secret room, Aunt Eleanor?" Emma asked, eyes wide with excitement. "The one where great-grandpa hid all his detective stuff." Eleanor laughed. "It wasn't exactly a secret room, sweetheart, just his study. And yes, you may see it, but be careful with the books." As the gathering settled into comfortable conversation, Eleanor found herself observing from a slight distance, marveling at how her life had transformed. The family dynamics had shifted fundamentally, Chris calling weekly just to check in, Megan and her family visiting monthly, the relationship building on mutual respect rather than obligation. Taylor remained incarcerated at FCI Waseca in Minnesota, serving her sentence with what her lawyers described as model behavior. She'd written Eleanor several letters awkward, sometimes defensive attempts at reconciliation, that nevertheless showed glimmers of genuine remorse. Eleanor had answered each one, maintaining boundaries while leaving the door open for a relationship that might someday evolve beyond their painful history. Stanley Wu appeared at Eleanor's elbow, his eyes twinkling with approval as he surveyed the gathering. "Harrison would be pleased," he said quietly, "not just with the foundation, but with you. You've come into your own, Eleanor." "I've had good examples," she replied, thinking of her father's integrity and her own heart-won wisdom. "And I've finally learned that standing up for myself isn't selfish, it's necessary." "A lesson many never learn," Stanley observed. "Your father was concerned you might continue putting everyone else first, even after he was gone. That's why the will was structured as it was, to force a reckoning that would either transform your family relationships or free you from them entirely." "It did both," Eleanor said thoughtfully. Chris is genuinely trying to change. Taylor? Well, that's more complicated, but at least the exploitation has stopped. Stanley nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. And the foundation will ensure Harrison's legacy continues. Justice for those who can't fight for themselves, that was always his mission. And mine now, Eleanor agreed. Though I'm finding there's room for justice and joy, Dad would want that too. As if to emphasize her point, Megan's children ran through the room, laughing as they played an improvised game of tag. The adults smiled indulgently, the sound of young laughter bringing warmth to a house that had been too formal for too long. Agent Lopez approached, accepting a glass of wine from a passing tray. Thought you might like to know Senator Holloway was sentenced this morning. 20 years, no possibility of parole before 15. The judge was particularly harsh given his position of public trust. And Dempsey? Eleanor asked. 18 years for his role in your father's death and the attempt on your life. He's still providing information on other clients who hired him for similar services over the years. It's opening up several cold cases. Eleanor absorbed this news with mixed emotions, satisfaction that justice had been served, sadness for the circumstances that had made it necessary. Will you testify at Taylor's sentencing next month? Lopez asked gently. It was a question Eleanor had been wrestling with for weeks. As a family member of both the victim and the defendant, her statement would carry significant weight. Yes, she said finally. Not to condemn her, the evidence does that already. But to speak about Dad, about who he really was beyond the Citizen Crusader headlines, he deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim or a symbol. Lopez nodded, understanding. Your father was lucky to have you. Eleanor, not everyone would have continued his fight for justice, especially against their own family. I'm not sure luck had anything to do with it. Eleanor replied. Dad spent a lifetime showing me what integrity looked like. When the moment came, I simply followed his example. The gathering continued as evening approached, conversations flowing easily among people connected by their relationship to either Harrison or Eleanor. Chris engaged Oprah in an animated discussion about prison reform, his newfound sobriety bringing a clarity to his thinking that impressed the former judge. Megan consulted with Stanley about legal strategies for the foundation, absorbing his decades of wisdom with genuine appreciation. As dusk fell, Eleanor slipped away to her father's study, now transformed into her home office, though still housing his beloved books. Harrison's portrait hung above the fireplace, his expression serious but with the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We did it, Dad, she said softly to the empty room. Justice for the teachers who lost their pensions, consequences for those responsible, and I'm finally living the life you wanted for me, one where I'm valued for who I am, not just what I can do for others. The house creaked gently, settling into the evening as it had for over a century, bearing witness to generations of joys and sorrows, betrayals and reconciliations. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of her father's law books, feeling connected to his legacy while forging her own path forward. A soft knock at the door revealed Oprah, concern in her eyes. You disappeared. Everything okay? Just taking a moment, Eleanor assured her. It's been an emotional day. Oprah nodded, understanding. Beginnings often are. That's what this is. You know, a beginning, not just an ending. I know, Eleanor agreed, taking one last look at her father's portrait before turning off the light. And I'm finally ready for it. They rejoined the gathering, where Chris was preparing to make a toast. He raised his glass, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. To Harrison Mitchell, he began, who taught some of us belatedly what real integrity looks like. To the Harrison Mitchell Justice Foundation, which will carry forward his commitment to fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. He paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the room. And to my sister Eleanor, who inherited not just our father's estate, but his courage, his persistence, and his unwavering moral compass, who showed me that it's never too late to choose a better path. I'm prouder than I can say to be your brother. Glasses raised around the room, voices echoing. To Eleanor, surrounded by friends and family who truly saw and valued her. Eleanor felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for most of her life. The journey hadn't been easy, from abandoned daughter to reluctant detective to family truth-teller, but it had led her here, to this moment of hard-won peace. Outside, the cherry trees along the Potomac were beginning to bloom, their pale pink blossoms promising renewal after a long winter. Tomorrow, Eleanor would walk among them, camera in hand, capturing their fleeting beauty from angles she'd never considered during her years of caregiving and obligation. But tonight, she would celebrate the foundation bearing her father's name, the relationships rebuilt on healthier foundations, and most importantly, The woman she had finally become, Eleanor Mitchell, defined not by what she gave to others, but by the truth she refused to surrender. It was, she reflected as she raised her own glass in response to the toast, exactly the legacy her father would have wanted. The Maine coastline stretched before Eleanor, rugged and magnificent in the October sunlight. She sat on the deck of the cottage, her cottage now watching waves crash against the rocky shore, while working on her manuscript. The memoir, tentatively titled The Inheritance of Truth, chronicled her family's journey from dysfunction to reckoning, weaving in the larger story of the pension fraud and its impact on thousands of victims. Publishers had approached her shortly after Senator Holloway's sentencing, offering substantial advances for her insider perspective on what the media had dubbed the pension conspiracy. Eleanor had declined initially, protective of her privacy and wary of exploitation. But as letters poured in from teachers affected by the fraud, she recognized that sharing her story might provide both healing and warning, a testament to the cost of corruption and the power of perseverance. Megan's voice carried from inside the cottage, where she was talking with her children about tide pools and the creatures that inhabited them. They'd arrived yesterday for their monthly visit, a tradition that had evolved naturally over the past year. Eleanor smiled, hearing Emma's excited questions about starfish and Jack's determination to find a real pirate treasure among the rocks. The case against Taylor had concluded 6 months earlier, with a reduced sentence of 8 years following her extensive cooperation with federal prosecutors. Eleanor had indeed spoken at the sentencing, delivering a statement that honored Harrison's memory while acknowledging Taylor's limited capacity for empathy, a trait that had led to tragic choices but didn't define her entire humanity. They continued to exchange letters, the correspondence gradually evolving from Taylor's defensive justifications to more reflective considerations of where her ambition had led her astray. Chris had moved to Boulder, Colorado, starting a small consulting business helping companies improve their financial ethics, an ironic but fitting career shift that utilized his charm and business acumen while channeling them toward positive ends. He called Eleanor weekly, their conversations no longer centered on requests for help, but genuine exchanges between equals. The Harrison Mitchell Justice Foundation had exceeded all expectations, recovering over $30 million for fraud victims through legal action and providing financial literacy education to prevent future exploitation. Eleanor served as its board chair, bringing her educator's perspective to the foundation's outreach efforts. Agent Lopez had been promoted to assistant director, overseeing a new task force dedicated to pension and retirement fund fraud. She still checked in with Eleanor periodically, their professional relationship having evolved into friendship. Aunt Eleanor, Emma called, bursting onto the deck with the boundless energy of childhood. Mom says we can go tide pooling now. Are you coming? Eleanor saved her document and closed her laptop. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As they descended the wooden steps to the beach, Eleanor reflected on how different her life was now compared to 18 months earlier. Then, she had been defined by obligation and routine, her own desires subordinated to others' needs. Now, she moved through the world with a sense of purpose and agency that felt both foreign and familiar, as if she'd finally become the person she was always meant to be. Look at this one, Aunt Eleanor, Jack exclaimed, pointing to a vibrant starfish clinging to a rock. It's the same color as your book cover. Eleanor smiled, kneeling beside her great-nephew, despite the protest of knees that reminded her she was approaching 70. It's beautiful, Jack. And you know what's special about starfish? If they lose an arm, they can grow a new one. They're incredibly resilient. Like you, Megan said quietly, joining them at the tide pool. Finding new strength after loss. Eleanor glanced up at her niece, touched by the observation. Like all of us, in different ways. They spent the afternoon exploring the coastline, collecting shells, photographing tide pool creatures, and building an elaborate sand castle that Jack insisted needed a moat to protect against pirates. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they gathered driftwood for a small beach fire, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows as the evening chill set in. I had a letter from Mom yesterday, Megan said as the children played nearby, carefully supervised by her husband. She's been approved to teach financial literacy classes to other inmates. She seems, I don't know, more grounded somehow. Teaching requires you to think about others' needs and perspectives, Eleanor observed. It might be good for her. Megan nodded thoughtfully. She asked about you, whether you seemed happy. What did you tell her? The truth, that you seem more truly yourself than I've ever known you to be. Eleanor gazed out at the darkening ocean, considering this assessment. I think that's accurate. I spent so many years accommodating everyone else that I lost track of my own preferences, my own voice. She smiled slightly. It's been an adventure, rediscovering them. Grandpa would be proud, Megan said softly, not just of the foundation or the justice that was served, but of who you've become. I think he knew who I could be, Eleanor replied. That's why he arranged things as he did, not just to punish Taylor and Chris, but to free me from patterns that were hurting all of us. As darkness fell completely, they extinguished the fire and gathered their belongings to return to the cottage. Eleanor lingered a moment, looking up at the vast canopy of stars visible away from city lights. Somewhere in that infinite expanse, she liked to think Harrison Mitchell was watching with approval as his daughter finally claimed the life she deserved. Coming, Aunt Eleanor, Jack called, his small hand extended toward her. Yes, she replied, taking his hand and turning toward the warm lights of the cottage. I'm right here. And she was fully present, authentically herself, no longer defined by what she gave to others, but by the truth she had claimed as her inheritance. Eleanor Mitchell had come home to herself at last.